Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are all doing great today. It is a very chilly day and kind of breezy day here in the Buckeye State. I think it's only like 48 or so where I'm at right now, so very chilly. But anyways, today I wanted to talk all about fall pansies. And what I mean by that is more a why you should be planting them in the fall rather than in the spring. So before I get into that, I do want to address a few things. First and foremost, this isn't really, I wouldn't say this is an option for everyone, depending on where you live. Because while pansies are very cold tolerant, they really are, I would say these are probably some of the last plants that still have flowers on them by the end of the season, but they do have their limits. And while there are hardier varieties of pansies, generally speaking, it's accepted that pansies are generally hardy down to, I would say, a zone 6. So where I'm at, zone 6B, is kind of close to that limit, but I've managed to limp them along. I seem to be able to get them through to spring. So, but anything more north than that, I would definitely suggest looking at hardier varieties. But if a zone is not labeled, sorry, I cannot talk today. I would assume they are hardy to probably zone 6 at the most. So that is something important to keep in mind if you choose to plant your pansies in the fall. The other thing that I would keep in mind is your pansies in containers. So actually, why don't I go and show you some of the 2 containers that I have with some gorgeous fall-themed pansies, perfect for this time of year. So here I have these orange and purple pansies, and I have another pot that I'll show you in a second. But I did want to make more a note on planting fall pansies in pots. I have found that in those cases, they don't seem to overwinter well for me in containers. I think maybe if I lived a little further south, or maybe if I gave it a little bit more protection, maybe I might try with these again. I think it'll just depend on how cold our winter is this year, but I would say that in colder climates, pansies oftentimes, at least for me, don't seem to overwinter successfully. So I think it's more of they overwinter well if you have them planted in the ground. But I still think they look very pretty, and they will last probably well into fall, probably up to and maybe even past Thanksgiving, depending on the weather. And I do think it's worth it still. And again, I might try again to get these to overwinter, but I'm not trying to get my hopes up too much. So I felt like that was important to note, that potted pansies specifically, if you live in more like that zone 6 area, they seem to have a harder time, again, I'm having a hard time talking today, of coming back in the spring. So I think just keep that in mind, that if you want them to come back and you live more in like those northern areas, planting them in the ground is definitely the safer option. So here's the other pot I have with these beautiful orange and purple pansies. This is just a repeat of the previous pot that I had. So it's very pretty. I love it. I love pansies. Pansies are one of my favorite plants, honestly, especially in the fall and spring. Or one of my favorite annuals, I would say. They're just so pretty, and they're just perfect for this time of year. Another thing I would like to mention about fall planted pansies is it is important to not plant them too early. So but it is important to plant them early enough. So, like a lot of plants we plant in the fall, like mums and perennials and things like that, it is important to get them in the ground as early as possible. But as far as pansies are concerned, you can't plant them out while it is still too warm. Now, I've read a guide that I'll actually put like a link that you'll just have to copy and paste. I can't make links in my channel right now, but they say to plant them by late September in my zone, or like on my general area. I was not able to do that this year because it was still too warm. Pansies, preferably, you should wait until the soil temperature soil temperature. I actually use a soil temperature map that I just Google, and I'll actually put a link to that in the description below if you're interested. But it can tell me roughly what the soil temperature is. So if you're planting them in the fall, and if you're planting them in the spring, but I think this is probably more important to mention in this fall, is they want soil temperatures not higher than 65, 70, but not lower than 40 or 45 degrees. If it's too warm, it can actually decrease their cold hardiness, and they may not actually come back. And I think they'll look kind of sickly, and they won't be as healthy. On the other hand, if you plant them too late and it's too cold, their roots won't have time to establish, and they will be very unlikely to come back. So, and that leads me to the middle ground, is they need to have, middle ground, but more of a summation is, don't plant them too early that it's still too warm, but don't plant them so late that they can't root, because it is important for pansies, if you're planting in fall, to have a good amount of time to root in so that they'll be hardy enough to come back in the winter. And so that is very important, especially considering that pansies are pretty shallow rooted, like most annuals, and their roots and their crown can easily be heaved out of the ground, which basically means when we have freeze and thaw cycles, which means that it's important to mulch to help prevent that, is basically when the soil freezes and then it thaws, it can literally start pushing your plants out of the ground. If they're not sufficiently anchored, so it is important that they have time to root, and or if they're not mulched properly. So definitely make sure that you apply mulch in the winter. So that's kind of like the when to plant your fall pansies. I'm not really going to get into the specifics on how to care for them. I believe I made a video about that earlier this spring when I was actually planting like a hanging basket of pansies. Same general care, it's just different season. But I'll flash the screenshot up on the screen if you're interested in looking into that video, if you want to learn more about like the care of pansies. But so that's sort of like the when to plant your pansies. So now I want to get into the two big reasons why you should plant them in the fall. So first and foremost, and I think this is probably the most obvious reason, is when you plant your pansies in the fall, you get 2 bloom seasons out of them. So as we know, pansies really do not like the heat. So they kind of fizzle out when it starts to get really hot in the summer. And of course, that's when we usually replace it with our beautiful summer annuals, your petunias, your marigolds, and things like that. But pansies really don't like the heat, so they do best in spring or fall. But where was I? But anyway, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. But you get 2 seasons out of them. So it really is, you get a win-win scenario if you plant them in fall. You get more time out of them because, again, in spring, I just don't think they last long enough. Like, I really love pansies, but they don't seem to last very long when I plant them in the spring. It's like they're there and then they're gone and I have to put my summer annuals in. So that is, I think, a big reason to plant them in the fall. The second reason, and I would say this is definitely something that you will notice, especially if you can get them to overwinter and come back in the spring. Which again, like I mentioned, if you live probably not colder than a zone 6 and you mulch them really well. I actually should have mentioned that earlier, is when it gets, I would say, below about 20 degrees or so, give them a nice layer of straw mulch. That will really help them and that'll keep them from getting pushed out. So, sorry, I forgot to mention that. But so that is important to mulch them because they're not indestructible, but I mean, they are still pretty tough, especially as far as annuals are concerned. So anyways, sorry, just little tip there. But back to where I was talking, is they actually bloom so much better in the spring. And I have actually noticed this firsthand. So I have planted pansies in the spring before, and again, they do fine, but they just seem to be more floriferous. And the reason for that is because when you plant your pansies in the fall, they have much more time to develop a more robust root system. So they really can root in very nicely so they can support a lot more vigorous growth in the spring. If you plant them in the spring, they don't have as big of a root system generally. Enough, obviously, so that they can flower, obviously, but they just do so much better when you plant your pansies in the fall, I think. So, and they just look much, much more floriferous, and ultimately you get a bigger bang for your buck. So that's kind of it, really, what I wanted to talk about. It's more about, like, again, this isn't really a how-to. These are more like tips and reasons why you should plant your pansies in the fall. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing some of the pansies. I do have more, but they all look basically the same. So I think you get the point. But if you guys enjoyed this video, if you could please give me a like, comment, and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. And I will see you guys in another video very soon. Thanks for watching.